Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, have you ever had trouble finishing projects? Like you're getting into some record, whether it's a single or an EP or an album or whatever it is, and you just have trouble saying, done, print, get it out the door, share it with the audience. This is where so many people get bogged down. There's a lot of people who will start a lot of projects, but have trouble finishing them. I remember there was a studio I worked out of a bunch back in New York City, and the studio owner said to me, he said, I always like to have someone else mix the things I've been working on because I feel like I'm a really good starter and a really bad finisher. And that is one potential solution, is to hire other people to help you finish things. And I honestly think that's one of the values that an independent third-party mastering engineer like myself still brings to a project, is that people can send something off to this third party and say, tell us if it's good enough. Tell us if it's done. Can you stress out about the last little this, that, and the other thing, and just tell us it's okay. Give us the stamp that says we can go move forward with this thing. And that's probably also one of the reasons that some producers like to work with a mixing engineer, is it takes that kind of load of finishing off of them. As a mastering engineer, I spend, every day in the studio helping people finish projects. So finishing is no big deal to me. I finish all the time. Every day I'm finishing with people, and I'm finding my clients when they're at that last stage in their process and helping usher them to the end, giving them that final stamp of approval, fixing any of those last little problems, giving that final QC, doing that final sweetening so that things sound and feel done to them. And also they have that confidence that someone outside of their project has said, yeah, this thing sounded finished. It sounds like it belongs on the shelf next to all these great records that you love. But even if you're not going to be a mastering engineer, and even if you're not going to mix your own recordings, there are still things you can learn about finishing projects. Now, I want to give you two big ways to think about how to know when you're done and how to get done so you can get this project out there and move on to the next one. Because that's where your real success in music or in audio comes from. It's not really from doing any one project. It's from doing the next project, and the next project, and the next project, each of them to the best of your ability. All right, let's get right into it. Before we do, a big shout out to my favorite sponsor on this podcast. Who is it? It's you. It's you. How do you sponsor this podcast? By smashing the like button. If you're on the YouTube version of this podcast, just go and give it a little smash. I've said it before. I'll say it again. If you gently tap the like button, that's fine. But the YouTube algorithm people have told me that if you go and like you make sparks fly out of it, then that's even better, apparently. That's what I'm told, at least. So give it a old smash and then subscribe. Also, big sponsor for this week's episode, Focusrite. They sent me this lovely Focusrite Claret Claret interface that has two delicious pre's in it. You're hearing me talk through it right now. Focusrite easily makes some of the best bang for the buck, high quality stuff out there when it comes to interfaces, from the super affordable, best-selling Scarlett line to the Claret line, what I'm talking through right now, all the way up into their Pro and RedNet series. Some great stuff. Check them out at Focusrite.com. Also, big thanks to Gear Club. Check them out, gear-club.net. That is gear-club.net or Gear Club, wherever you get your podcasts, because they make what is probably the other best podcast in the world of audio engineering and music production. Tell them we sent you. Last but not least, sponsoring this podcast from the beginning. Do you know who it is by now? It's Soundtoys. Check them out, soundtoys.com. Making, honestly, some of my favorite creative mixing effects. Try out anything they make for free at soundtoys.com. Okay, so here are two big ways that you can get finished with your records, with your music projects, so you can put them out there with confidence. And two big things in both mixing and in mastering that come up. I'll give you the easy one first, and I'll give you the important one second. The easy one is that when you start to get to a place where you're making very, very small changes again and again and going back over the same small changes again and again, you're probably done. This is especially true in mixing. It's also true in mastering. But if you're going back and forth about the vocal and whether it should be up by 0.1 dB or down by 0.1 dB in this area, you're probably done. If it's by 0.2 dB, up 0.2, down 0.2, you're probably done. If you're questioning whether the vocal should be up or down by 1 dB or 2 dB or 3 dB, then you probably need to still keep on working, and you probably need to start trying some vocal automation because, spoiler alert, great sounding vocals in mixes, usually it's not just about set it and forget it. Here's my one compressor setting and level setting, and now I'm done. There's usually going to be some riding. That's probably the last thing you want to do in your mix. You probably want to get a great kind of stable mix first, just off of things like fader settings and pan, and then EQ, and then compression, and then adding in your effects. And now you automate things. But once you've gotten to that part of the process, and now you're kind of playing with those squiggles, should the automation here be up a tiny bit, down? You're done. That's it. And hopefully you're mixing through some bus processing that's also going to help make some of those final decisions for you by kind of smoothing out some of those tiny changes. Anyway, long story short is, if you're going back and forth over the same things again and again, and they're small, it's not really because you're doing productive music work anymore. It's because you're fiddling and you're nervous and you're having trouble saying, I'm done. I did this to the best of my ability. And this leads us in to the second and much more powerful strategy that you can employ to be much better at finishing. And that is to recognize that things are never going to be perfect. I know you already know that nothing's ever going to be perfect. The thing to strive for, and the best thing you can go for here, is how good can I get this in the time allotted? This is a totally different question, a totally different way of thinking. And a lot of people don't discover it until they've been doing this for a while. And I'll tell you that early on, when you're starting out, you're first getting into playing music, producing, mixing, editing, mastering, whatever it is, it can actually be smart and useful to spend way too long on things and try way too long to get things perfect. You fail at getting perfect, but you've put in the hours on this stuff. A, to get it better than you could have gotten it in a shorter time period, and B, to give yourself more practice at the thing that you want to get good at. So there's something to be said for early on spending too much time. But when you want to get serious, you want to get professional, you want to start making this into a career, it's not about spending a lot of time on any one thing. It's about spending a lot of time overall. And one of the best ways to do that is say, this game is no longer, if I had infinite time, how good could I get this project? Because if you're asking yourself that, you'll spend infinite time on it. But if instead you give yourself some kind of deadline, and that might be, say for me, I'll say this first track I'm going to master for this client who I've never worked on their stuff before, I'd like to see if I could get it done in no more than 90 minutes. Some masters take me a lot shorter than that. Every once in a while, there's some kind of problem master where I spend longer, and I still go through that puzzling and not finishing when I know I should be finishing because I'm second guessing things. It happens to me still. But if you give yourself that kind of thing, I'm going to see how good can I get this in 1 hour, or how good can I get this in 90 minutes, or how good can I get this in a day? Whatever the goal is, it changes the entire conversation. And I do not think that it's going to play into that fear that you have right now. If I limit myself in time, I'm going to limit the quality. I don't think that happens. In my experience, the opposite happens. What happens is your quality often ends up improving because you realize how important each decision you make is and how important each minute you spend is. So you start to get much more intentional. And sometimes limiting the time you have allotted actually makes you do better work because you're living more in the moment. You're listening more critically, more concretely. You're taking on better strategies. You're doing the things you know you should be doing instead of just fiddling and playing with this one thing a little bit longer and burning yourself out in the process. If you switch your mindset from how good can I get this to how good can I get this by this time today, or how could I get this by this time this month, or how good of a record can we make by March 31st, or whatever it is. It's an entirely different question than how good of a record can we make. And it's a question that really makes you focus on the importance of each decision that you make, recognize that you're playing it for real, And also, it'll get you putting out music more often. Putting out music more often is super important because that's how you build a career these days. It's not about, no one's ever heard of you and now you drop 12 songs at once and you hope that they hear of you. No, you've got to feed the machine. You got to put out a stream of stuff. You've got to keep on being out there, touching people, reminding them that you're there, giving them a stream of releases that they can dip their toes into. And then once they love you, then they buy the big thing or they go to the concert or whatever it is. So that's one part of it, but that's not the only part of it. The other reason why it's so super important to put out more music is because that's how you get good at putting out music. That's how you get good at making music. You will get better at music if you take one song and try to rework it again and again and again and again and again. You'll get better, but you'll get better faster and you'll get better to a more significant degree if you do that on one song and then another song and then another song and then another song and then another song. Instead of being so precious about this one song, do it to the best of your ability in the time allotted and then move on. And then do the same thing on another song, do the same thing on another song, etc. And instead of being so precious about that first song, just let it be. Get it out there. Let it do its thing. Let it fall flat on its face or, soar into the clouds and find a wonderful audience of people who love it. You know what? You can always get precious later. You can always go back and say, that one song I did really early on, you know what? I have all these ideas about how I can make it even better, and I'm going to revisit that song today. You can do that months later. You can revisit a song from early on in your career. You're allowed to do it. Artists don't do it that often, and there's probably some reasons for that. And it's probably that, to a significant degree, the best artists out there know that the most important song is the next one. And they also learn to be forgiving of themselves. And rather than listening back to their earliest work and only saying, oh man, that was so bad, I could do so much better today, they are able to look back and say, you know what? That was the best that I could do back then in the time allotted. And it's so cool to see how far I've come. But listening back to that now, it's like, yeah, that was the best I was capable of doing back then as that person in the time that I had to do it in. And that's what came out of it. And that is just captured essence of that time in my life. And they can be forgiving of themselves and their material. And that's something you've got to be able to do for yourself as well, as be forgiving of yourself. Now, I know you might have one last concern, which is, what if I'm mixing or I'm mastering someone else's music and they need it to be as good as possible? They're not going to settle for all of my flaws, so I have to make sure that I work it to the death and you spend all this time on it so that they don't feel like there's any shortcomings on my part. Well, a couple things here. One, there's always going to be shortcomings on your part and on the artist's part everywhere. There's always something that you can make sound different on a record. And sometimes it's not even a matter of better or worse. It's just different. There's things you could have done differently. So that's number one. So you got to be forgiving in the sense that you don't strive for perfection, because perfection doesn't really come, because there's always a different way that you could have made things sound. Thing number two is that this is true for all of your other competition. What you need to be able to do is do as good or better of a job than any of your other competition that it made sense for your client to work with. And you have to make them ultimately happy. And the little things that you are hearing that could be different or whatever, the things that you're going back and forth again and again on, should this snare drum be up by 0.2 dB or down by 0.2 dB, they would probably be there in the studio with you saying, like, it's fine both ways. Just do one. So just do one. And an additional thing here is part of the let's get as good as we can in the time allotted concept when it comes to working for clients, is that part of the time allotted is you leave the door open to potentially maybe there being revisions. At least that's the case in digital mastering and mixing these days. The expectation is revisions are possible. So the client is ultimately going to listen and say, we're good, we're golden, and hopefully that happens a lot. Hopefully that's happening for you 80 to 90% of the time. They just say, we're done. But for those times that it doesn't happen, you just have a process. You have the expectation of, this is a conversation. Let's go back, get all of the revision notes, and do hopefully just one round of revisions and get him the thing. And that's part of the time allotted. So when you're thinking about a mix, you're thinking about a master, the time allotted doesn't just mean I want to get 2 mixes done today or whatever you think is the right number of mixes in a day. It also means, and I'll probably set aside another hour or 2 for revisions in the future if you're working on an all digital system like so many people are. And then the last thing, again, to put your fears at ease here, is that when you take this approach of not how good can I get this record, but how good can I get in the time allotted, when you take that approach, you're probably going to do better work. You really are. So just give it a shot. I'm here to give you permission to get over your perfectionism and just let these things go. Put them out there. Get one out there. Not good enough? You know what? Put out another one. Because that's how real careers and real skills are made. Well, I hope this one has been useful for you. Have you had trouble finishing now or in the past? What are some of the tactics that have worked for you? Have you tried this approach? Let us know how it goes. I want to hear from you in the comments down below. I read every single one and I respond when I can. Big thanks to you for smashing that like button. Remember to hit subscribe and that notification bell so you don't miss any other episodes. Also, I want to give something to you for free. If you want to get even better at mixing and this approach of mixing within the time allotted, doing it efficiently and well and reliably and repeatably, I want you to check out a totally free workshop I have for you called the 5 Habits of Truly Great Mixers. You can check it out at SonicScoop.com/mixhabits. That's SonicScoop.com/mixhabits, where I tie together the common threads in the approaches of all the best producers and engineers, Grammy winners, multi-platinum sellers that I've interviewed and studied. Get the 5 big takeaways, the 5 habits of truly great mixers at SonicScoop.com/mixhabits. If you want a system that really puts this stuff into a framework, you can check out my premium course. You can check that out at mixingbreakthroughs.com. If you're more into the mastering side, you can check out my free mastering workshop at SonicScoop.com/mastering101. That's SonicScoop.com/mastering101. Big thanks again to you for sponsoring this episode by smashing the like button or rating this and reviewing it on iTunes or wherever you get your audio podcast. But also a big thanks to Focusrite for sending this lovely claret interface to talk through. And it is super solidly built, tremendous bang for the buck stuff. At the lower end, the Scarlett is one of the best-selling interface series of all time for good reason. The Claret, a step up from that, really solid, great stuff for any pro or semi-pro studio. And then they have really nice high-end stuff in the Red and RedNet series. That's just really wonderful that you got to check out. Also, a big shout out to the Gear Club podcast. You can check them out, gear-club.net. That's gear-club.net, or type in Gear Club wherever you get your podcasts. They're one of my favorite podcasts for audio engineer and producer interviews. Last but not least, big thanks to one of my favorite sponsors of all time, sponsoring this podcast from the beginning, Sound Toys. Check out anything they make for free at soundtoys.com. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop. Thanks for hanging out with me. See you next time.